They actually thought John Wayne could play Genghis Khan. Hollywood has never shied away from bold choices, but some casting decisions are so bizarre they almost defy belief. What happens when star power overrides authenticity and legends are rewritten in the most unexpected ways? In this video, we're diving into the strangest casting choices of classic cinema, where every surprising face tells a bigger story. And just wait until you see which Hollywood icon turned up in a role nobody saw coming. John Wayne as Genghis Khan, The Conqueror, 1956. When Hollywood decided to chronicle the epic saga of Genghis Khan, the ruthless Mongolian conqueror who forged one of the largest empires in history, there was no shortage of stories to choose from: brutal warfare, sweeping love affairs, betrayal, and the clash of civilizations. But in the boardrooms of 1950s Tinseltown, it wasn't history or accuracy that won the day, it was star power. And so, in a move that still baffles film lovers and historians, the role of the legendary Asian warlord was handed to none other than John Wayne, the rugged, all-American cowboy, the Duke himself. To understand how strange this casting was, you have to consider Wayne's persona. By 1956, John Wayne was the living embodiment of the American West. He was the rough-and-tumble hero in countless westerns, with his slow drawl, towering frame, and unmistakable swagger. He was America in a cowboy hat, a symbol so powerful that audiences could barely imagine him as anything but a sheriff, a soldier, or a cattleman. So, when he stepped onto the windswept Utah desert set of The Conqueror in full Mongol regalia, with heavy makeup attempting to simulate Asian features, the disconnect was immediate and total. What's most astounding is how serious the production took itself. Howard Hughes, the eccentric billionaire and studio mogul, poured a fortune into the film. No expense was spared on costumes, sets, or marketing. But every scene is overshadowed by Wayne's presence, his accent, his physicality, even his attempts at exotic body language. Rather than disappearing into the role, Wayne stands out like a sore thumb. Instead of a fierce steppe warlord, he's the Duke reciting lines from a history book, sometimes looking visibly uncomfortable beneath layers of pancake makeup. Dialogue that should be delivered with menace comes out with that familiar, easygoing Wayne twang, creating a bizarre, unintentional comedy. The result was more than just a strange casting decision. It became a pop culture punchline. Critics were merciless, and audiences were stunned. The film was a box office failure, and its reputation has only grown worse with time. Today, The Conqueror is studied in film schools as a cautionary tale about the dangers of miscasting and Hollywood's history of ignoring authenticity for star appeal. Tragically, the film is also infamous for another reason. It was shot near nuclear testing grounds, and many cast and crew members, including Wayne himself, later developed cancer, fueling rumors that the production was literally cursed. John Wayne's Genghis Khan stands as one of classic Hollywood's strangest, most controversial casting choices, a moment when the industry's obsession with celebrity blinded it to everything else, and audiences were left to wonder, what were they thinking? Mickey Rooney as Mr. Yunyoshi. Breakfast at Tiffany's, 1961. Classic Hollywood loved its icons, but sometimes it seemed to have no idea what to do with them. Enter Breakfast at Tiffany's, one of the most visually glamorous films ever produced, draped in moonlit romance and mid-century New York charm. Audrey Hepburn's Holly Golightly is often cited as one of cinema's great performances, but lurking just beyond the shimmering party scenes is a choice that modern audiences, and many from the film's own era, have never stopped questioning: casting Mickey Rooney, a white American comedian, as Mr. Yunyoshi, Holly's Japanese landlord. The result is a jarring contradiction. Rooney was famous for his broad physical comedy in films like the Andy Hardy series, but nothing in his career suggested he was fit to play an Asian character. Yet with heavy prosthetic makeup, false buck teeth, and a thickly exaggerated accent, Rooney is transformed on screen, not into a believable Japanese man, but into a caricature, almost cartoonish in its exaggeration. His every appearance is marked by wild gestures, loud outbursts, and slapstick clumsiness, played for cheap laughs that, by the early 1960s, already felt out of step with changing attitudes. At the time, Hollywood saw nothing unusual about yellowface, the practice of casting white actors in Asian roles. But the reception to Rooney's performance was notably mixed, even in its own day. Japanese and Asian American groups protested its release, and even some reviewers called out the portrayal as offensive or at least distracting. As decades passed, this criticism only grew louder. What might have once passed as mere comic relief is now cited as one of the most egregious examples of Hollywood racism, a reminder of the industry's long history of marginalizing and stereotyping minorities. Ironically, Mickey Rooney himself later expressed surprise at the backlash, insisting he never meant to offend. But intentions aside, the legacy of Mr. Yunyoshi endures, almost overshadowing the film's many triumphs. When Breakfast at Tiffany's is revisited today, it's impossible to ignore the way this subplot jars against the movie's otherwise timeless elegance. The strange casting of Rooney as Yunyoshi is a time capsule of an era when representation was an afterthought, and stereotypes were considered fair game for comedy. It stands as a lesson in the lasting power of Hollywood's choices, and a reminder that even the most beloved classics can carry the weight of their cultural blind spots. Marlon Brando as Sakini, The Tea House of the August Moon, 1956. Marlon Brando was the method actor who changed Hollywood forever. He could vanish into the soul of Stanley Kowalski or Don Vito Corleone, bringing an unpredictable, almost dangerous energy to the screen. So when MGM announced he'd be starring as Sakini, the Japanese interpreter and comic narrator of The Tea House of the August Moon, it sounded like a move born of marquee ambition. But in practice, it would become one of the strangest, most controversial casting choices of the Golden Age. The film itself is a snapshot of post-war optimism, and an American army officer is assigned to help rebuild a small Okinawan village, guided by Sakini's sly wit. But it's Brando's appearance that dominates every frame. His face transformed with prosthetics and makeup, his speech altered to mimic a Japanese accent, and his body language exaggerated for comedic effect. The transformation was so complete that some early audiences reportedly didn't even recognize Brando until the credits rolled. But to modern eyes, the performance is almost surreal. Hollywood's penchant for yellowface had rarely gone this far with a superstar of Brando's caliber. Even in 1956, there was unease about the choice. Asian American actors and advocacy groups voiced their objections, noting how few opportunities existed for actual Asian performers. Yet for Brando, it was a technical challenge, an exercise in total immersion. He reportedly studied Japanese mannerisms and dialects for months to prepare, but no amount of preparation could bridge the fundamental mismatch between the star's identity and the character he portrayed. Critically, the film was a hit, audiences laughed, and reviewers praised Brando's versatility. But over time, its legacy has grown complicated. What once seemed a harmless comic role now feels like a glaring example of Hollywood's blindness to authentic representation. Brando's Sakini is not only a product of its time, but a reminder of the industry's willingness to cast anyone, anywhere, if the name was big enough. For modern viewers, Brando's performance in The Tea House of the August Moon is as fascinating as it is uncomfortable, a testament to his skill, yes, but also to the misplaced priorities of an era when even the world's greatest actor could be reduced to an ethnic cliché for the sake of a box office draw. Charlton Heston as Ramon Miguel, Mike Vargas, Touch of Evil, 1958. The noir classic, Touch of Evil, is celebrated for Orson Welles' bravura direction, moody cinematography, and a famously gripping opening shot that seems to last forever. Yet nestled amid all this artistry is a casting decision so odd, so wildly miscalculated, that it nearly derails the film's credibility every time its leading man steps on screen. Charlton Heston, the granite-jawed, defiantly American star of The Ten Commandments and Ben-Hur, was chosen to play Ramon Miguel Mike Vargas, a crusading Mexican narcotics officer. Heston was, in many ways, the embodiment of post-war American heroism, commanding, statuesque, and unmistakably Anglo-Saxon. The story goes that Heston was originally approached to play the lead, but when Orson Welles was brought in to direct and star as the corrupt police captain Hank Quinlan, Heston's role was rewritten as a Mexican. The transformation from action hero to Latino was achieved not with any actual connection to the culture or community, but with darkened makeup, slicked hair, and an accent that fluctuated between subtle and stereotypical. The casting feels jarring from the start. Heston's natural persona, a cross between a statesman and an Old Testament prophet, collides with the character's supposed background as a sensitive, justice-seeking Mexican official. No amount of makeup or costuming can disguise the fundamental mismatch. Scenes intended to carry emotional weight become unintentionally awkward, as Heston's ethnic mannerisms sit uncomfortably atop his all-American bravado. The effect is especially pronounced in scenes with Vargas's wife, played by Janet Leigh, whose on-screen chemistry with Heston never quite bridges the cultural divide the story insists upon. In 1958, such casting was not unusual. Hollywood's go-to approach was to have bankable white actors play any ethnicity required, with authenticity a distant afterthought. But in retrospect, Heston's performance is a perfect snapshot of this era's misguided logic. Critics and scholars have since debated whether the choice was offensive or simply absurd, but either way, it undeniably weakens the film's aspirations toward realism. Even defenders of Touch of Evil must admit the role might have soared with a Latino actor in the lead. Despite its place among film noir masterpieces, Touch of Evil is forever linked to this strange, tone-deaf experiment in casting, a reminder that even cinematic brilliance can't always outshine the consequences of choosing the wrong actor for the part. Katharine Hepburn as Jade Tan. Dragonseed, 1944. By the time Dragonseed hit theaters, Katharine Hepburn was already one of Hollywood's brightest stars, revered for her fierce intelligence, distinct voice, and signature American poise. It was precisely these qualities, so quintessentially Hepburn, that made her casting as Jade Tan, a Chinese peasant woman living under Japanese occupation, so truly bewildering. The film, based on Pearl S. Buck's novel, was meant to be a stirring tale of wartime resistance and family endurance, set in rural China. But from the moment Hepburn appears in the role, it's clear that Hollywood's idea of authenticity fell a distant second to star power. Hepburn's transformation into Jade Tan was accomplished with heavy makeup, prosthetics around her eyes, and a wardrobe of traditional Chinese garments. The studio's decision wasn't limited to Hepburn. Nearly the entire main cast, Walter Huston, Agnes Moorehead, and Aline McMahon, were all white actors made up to appear Chinese. This wasn't rare for the era, but Dragonseed took the practice to a whole new level. The result is a parade of familiar faces rendered unrecognizable, moving through carefully constructed sets that look more like a Hollywood soundstage than any real Chinese village. Hepburn, to her credit, approaches the role with the full force of her talent. She plays Jade Tan as courageous, dignified, and resourceful, qualities she brought to nearly every part she played. But no amount of commitment can overcome the inherent awkwardness of her casting. Her voice, posture, and gestures are unmistakably Western, and her attempts at an accent feel forced. The dissonance is so powerful that it can take viewers out of the story entirely, leaving them to wonder how anyone ever thought this casting could work. Contemporary audiences and critics noticed the disconnect, but the film still received several Oscar nominations, with Aline McMahon's performance as Jade's mother also drawing particular attention. In recent decades, however, Dragonseed has been re-examined as a prime example of Hollywood's long history of yellowface, a practice that denied Asian actors the chance to tell their own stories, even as movies about their lives filled the big screen. Today, Hepburn's role in Dragonseed is seen less as a testament to her versatility and more as a symbol of how deeply entrenched and deeply strange Hollywood's casting practices once were. It remains a case study of the dangers of prioritizing star billing over cultural truth. Laurence Olivier as Othello. Othello, 1965. By the mid-1960s, Laurence Olivier was not just a household name, he was the living face of Shakespeare on stage and screen. His performances were hailed as definitive, and his ability to embody any role seemed almost limitless to audiences of the time. Yet even in that context, the decision to have Olivier play the Moorish General Othello using full blackface makeup and an accent stands out as one of the strangest and most unsettling casting choices in classic cinema history. Othello is a story about race, jealousy, and power, set in a world where the title character is an outsider by his skin and heritage. But instead of searching for a black or North African actor, producers went straight to the biggest name in British theater. Olivier, ever the perfectionist, approached the part with his usual commitment to craft. He studied African dialects, altered his voice, and used makeup to darken his skin considerably. He even devised a particular walk and mannerisms to set Othello apart from his other Shakespearean roles. To audiences at the time, this was not entirely shocking. The tradition of white actors playing Othello stretched back centuries on both the British and American stage, but the arrival of the film version in the mid-1960s coincided with major social changes, civil rights movements, debates about racial representation, and a new push for authenticity in the arts. For many viewers, the spectacle of a white man playing a black general no longer felt simply theatrical. It felt jarringly out of step with the times. Critically, the film was a strange mixture of praise and discomfort. Olivier's technical virtuosity was undeniable, but even some reviewers admitted they struggled to reconcile the actor's skill with the obvious, problematic choice of casting. Modern audiences find the film almost unwatchable for this reason, and it is now cited as a cautionary tale about the dangers of tradition overshadowing common sense and cultural progress. Olivier's Othello has become a symbol, not of the actor's range, but of an era in which even the most talented performers were enlisted to prop up practices that excluded others. The film's legacy is a complicated one, a fascinating record of a master actor's technique, and at the same time, an artifact of a Hollywood and theater system that was slow to accept the obvious truth that some roles should never have been handed to anyone but those who lived the experience. Paul Muni as Wong, The Good Earth, 1937. In the era of sweeping Hollywood epics, The Good Earth stood out as a major studio's ambitious attempt to tell a story of Chinese peasants struggling through hardship and hope. Based on Pearl S. Buck's Pulitzer Prize-winning novel, the film was touted as a respectful, deeply human look at life in rural China. But the reality of its casting choices tells a different story. For the role of Wang Lung, MGM cast Paul Muni, a gifted, versatile, and unmistakably European-American actor, as the humble Chinese farmer at the film's heart. Muni was no stranger to transformation. He had already portrayed everything from French revolutionaries to Mexican bandits. For The Good Earth, he underwent hours of makeup daily, his eyes reshaped, his skin darkened, his hairline adjusted. Alongside him was Luise Rainer, another white actor, as his wife Olan. The entire main cast was white, save for a handful of smaller roles relegated to Asian actors, such as the future star Anna May Wong, who, in a particularly cruel twist, was passed over for the lead because producers feared it would offend audiences to see a Chinese actress opposite a white man. Muni's performance is earnest, and he approaches Wang Lung's struggles with dignity and intensity. Yet, there's an undeniable discomfort in watching a European-American actor, under layers of makeup, act out the joys and sorrows of rural Chinese life. The effect is only heightened by the studio's choice to stylize the actors' voices and movements, adding an extra layer of artificiality. For all its lush cinematography and melodramatic sweep, the film can never escape the shadow of its casting. The public and critical response at the time was largely positive. The Good Earth won multiple Oscars and remains celebrated for its visual achievements. But as decades passed, its yellow-face casting became a textbook example of Hollywood's exclusion of minorities and the missed opportunities to tell authentic stories using authentic voices. Today, Paul Muni's Wang Lung is remembered less as a testament to his talent and more as a symbol of how Hollywood's pursuit of universality often meant erasing the very people at the heart of the story. The film's strange casting is a lasting reminder of an era when, no matter the subject, the face Hollywood wanted was all too often its own. Rex Harrison as Dr. Doolittle. Dr. Doolittle, 1967. Though released at the very edge of the Golden Age, Rex Harrison's turn as the eccentric animal-talking physician in Dr. Doolittle stands as one of classic Hollywood's most baffling casting decisions, made stranger still by the film's troubled legacy. By the late 1960s, Harrison was already a Broadway and Hollywood legend, famous for his elegant diction and sly sophistication in hits like My Fair Lady and Cleopatra. But nothing about his persona suggested a whimsical, childlike adventurer capable of chatting with two-headed llamas or leading tropical animal parades. The production of Dr. Doolittle was plagued with problems from the outset. The studio, eager for another family musical blockbuster in the tradition of Mary Poppins and The Sound of Music, poured millions into elaborate sets and special effects. Harrison, by now in his late 50s, was cast to bring gravitas and star power to the role. Yet, his own temperament, famously prickly and somewhat impatient, quickly became the stuff of legend on set. The cast and crew described frequent clashes, especially when it came to musical numbers. Harrison's voice, never particularly suited to song, required significant studio support and creative workarounds to fit the film's lavish score. Audiences expecting a gentle, warm-hearted veterinarian found instead a somewhat aloof, almost irritable English gentleman, seemingly more comfortable in drawing rooms than jungles. Harrison's Dr. Doolittle delivers witty barbs and cerebral observations with the air of a scholar, hardly the sort of childlike wonder needed to carry a fantasy epic about talking to animals. The disconnect between actor and material was only worsened by the overlong, meandering script and production headaches, from weather disasters to out-of-control animals and a budget that ballooned far beyond its means. Despite a massive promotion, the film flopped with critics and struggled at the box office, becoming infamous as one of Hollywood's most expensive misfires of the era. Yet, in an odd twist, Dr. Doolittle was nominated for the Best Picture Oscar, thanks largely to behind-the-scenes lobbying, not audience demand. The film's strange legacy is sealed by Harrison's performance, a star who seemed to have wandered into the wrong story, unable to bridge the gap between English sophistication and wide-eyed fantasy. Today, the casting of Rex Harrison as Doctor. Doolittle stands as a warning to studios. Star power alone can't make an unlikely role work. No matter the budget or prestige, sometimes the strangest casting choices are the ones that make you wonder if anyone on set ever asked, "Is this really the right man for the job?" Bela Lugosi as Jesus Christ. The Return of the Holy Grail 1935, unfinished rare. The history of Hollywood is littered with strange footnotes and unfinished projects, but few are as eyebrow-raising as the story of Bela Lugosi, best known as the definitive Dracula, briefly cast as Jesus Christ. In the early 1930s, Lugosi's career was riding high after the iconic success of Dracula 1931, where his magnetic, sinister presence forever defined the vampire in popular culture. Eager to capitalize on his newfound fame, Lugosi took on a series of eclectic roles, but none proved as peculiar or as ill-fated as his involvement with the Return of the Holy Grail. Details of the production are sparse, with much of its history shrouded in legend. Intended as a religious epic, the film was to trace the journey of the Holy Grail from Christ's crucifixion through centuries of myth and miracle. Lugosi, with his piercing gaze and unmistakable Hungarian accent, was tapped to play none other than Jesus himself. The idea of Dracula's star embodying the world's most revered religious figure quickly became a source of confusion, gossip, and, according to some reports, outrage among religious leaders and film insiders alike. The project, already ambitious and expensive, soon found itself mired in controversy and logistical chaos. Early test footage reportedly left both studio executives and church authorities uneasy. Lugosi, whose public image was tightly tied to horror and villainy, struggled to overcome audience perceptions. The contrast between his dark, intense screen presence and the serene, compassionate Christ was simply too great to reconcile. Within months, funding dried up, and the film was quietly abandoned. Little, if any, footage survived, and the unfinished movie quickly faded into obscurity. Still, the idea that Bela Lugosi, the face of Hollywood horror, was once cast as Jesus remains one of the industry's most bizarre what-ifs. It serves as a reminder of how strange, desperate, or daring the studio system could become in pursuit of a hit. This lost role stands as a testament to how even the most talented actors can find themselves swept up in decisions that, in hindsight, seem almost surreal. Today, the mention of Lugosi as Christ is a favorite bit of Hollywood trivia, a whispered legend from a time when casting was often more about spectacle than sense. For film buffs and historians, it's an enduring example of how truly strange classic Hollywood could be when it reached too far outside the expected. Groucho Marx as Coco, the Lord High Executioner. The Mikado, 1939, unproduced test. The story of Groucho Marx's brush with the Mikado is a little-known chapter in Hollywood's long saga of strange casting. Groucho Marx, he of the bushy mustache, rolling eyes, and razor-sharp wisecracks, remains a towering figure in classic American comedy, thanks to the anarchic films of the Marx brothers. His screen persona was so distinct, so inherently modern and subversive, that seeing him anywhere but in his own surreal universe was jarring. Yet in the late 1930s, he was screen-tested for the role of Coco, the Lord High Executioner, in a proposed big-budget adaptation of Gilbert and Sullivan's The Mikado. The Mikado itself is an operetta famous for its satirical skewering of British bureaucracy and manners, all dressed up in a fantasy version of Japan. Hollywood, ever hungry for spectacle, saw potential for a lavish musical. The casting of Groucho, however, was both an act of creative ambition and a bizarre cultural misstep. Here was a quintessentially American Jewish comedian, celebrated for rapid-fire sarcasm and breaking the fourth wall, attempting to slip into the world of comic opera and exotic pageantry. The surviving test footage is as odd as you'd imagine. Groucho, in stage makeup and costume, delivers Coco's patter songs in his trademark nasal twang, mugging for the camera with all the mischievous abandon he brought to Duck Soup and A Night at the Opera. The juxtaposition is both fascinating and deeply out of place. The operetta's Victorian satire and delicate melodies sit uncomfortably beside Groucho's brash, anti-establishment energy. The test is part musical, part Marx Brothers skit, with the actor's New York sensibility clashing against the operetta's faux Japanese stylings. At the time, yellowface, white actors playing Asian roles with makeup, was still common. But by 1939, even some within the industry questioned whether the joke had gone too far. Audiences, meanwhile, weren't sure what to make of Groucho in such an alien setting. Ultimately, the film was never made. Whether due to studio nerves, changing tastes, or the looming shadow of World War II, Groucho's Lord High Executioner faded into the annals of what could have been. Yet, this screen test remains a powerful illustration of how star power sometimes led Hollywood straight into creative absurdity. Groucho Marx's flirtation with the Mikado is less a lost masterpiece than a vivid reminder of how the Golden Age could chase novelty at the expense of common sense and sometimes cultural sensitivity. In a career built on breaking the rules, even Groucho found there were some parts that just didn't fit, no matter how big the laughs. Boris Karloff as Mr. Wong. Mr. Wong series, 1938 to 1940. In the shadowy world of B-movie mysteries, Boris Karloff's name was a guarantee of intrigue. Best known as the monster in Frankenstein and a master of horror, Karloff was one of classic Hollywood's most recognizable faces. Yet, among his long filmography is a chapter that still puzzles film historians and modern viewers alike. His portrayal of the Chinese-American detective, Mr. Wong, in a series of films for Monogram Pictures. Karloff, born William Henry Pratt in England, was already an established star when he donned the silk robes and mustache of James Lee Wong. The choice followed a familiar but troubling Hollywood pattern, casting white actors in Asian roles, relying on makeup, costuming, and carefully coached accents to bridge the cultural gap. Karloff played the role with a gentle dignity, attempting to bring intelligence and nuance to the detective, and the films themselves leaned heavily into the conventions of the period's exotic mystery genre. But even by the standards of the late 1930s, this casting was a strange fit. Karloff's deep voice and unmistakable screen presence were difficult to disguise, and despite the careful application of eye prosthetics and skin tinting, his Britishness bled through in every scene. While his portrayal avoided the overt buffoonery of some contemporaries like Charlie Chan's Sidney Toler or Warner Oland, it couldn't escape the inherent awkwardness of the enterprise. Mr. Wong's mysteries were supposed to feel cosmopolitan and worldly, but the illusion was never complete. Audiences were always aware that it was Karloff beneath the surface. The films themselves, Mr. Wong, Detective, The Mystery of Mr. Wong in Chinatown, and others, became modest hits, spawning sequels and cementing the character as a fixture in B cinema. Yet, Asian actors remained excluded from the lead, even as smaller roles were sometimes filled by actual Chinese-American performers. Off-screen, Karloff was reportedly uneasy with the role and the larger trend of yellowface, later expressing regret for having participated. With the benefit of hindsight, Boris Karloff's Mr. Wong is less a case of malice than of the era's blindness, a well-intentioned actor working within the industry's narrow confines. Still, the casting stands as one of classic Hollywood's strangest choices, a relic of a time when even the best intentions couldn't correct for a system built on exclusion. Luise Rainer as Olan, The Good Earth, 1937. When MGM set out to adapt Pearl S. Buck's Pulitzer Prize-winning novel, The Good Earth, they envisioned an epic that would sweep audiences into the hardships and beauty of rural China. The film's grandeur, its sweeping vistas and carefully choreographed set pieces, earned it accolades and Oscars. Yet, at its core, lies one of the most curious and controversial casting decisions of the era. The role of Olan, the humble, suffering Chinese farm wife, given to Luise Rainer, a white Austrian actress who, until then, was best known for her emotional European performances. Rainer's casting was the result of a combination of studio politics and the racial attitudes of 1930s Hollywood. At the time, MGM was unwilling to risk a major production on an Asian star, despite the presence of Anna May Wong, the era's most prominent Chinese-American actress, in supporting roles. Fearing audience backlash over interracial relationships with Paul Muni, another white actor, cast as Wang Lung, the studio instead transformed Rainer and Muni into acceptable Asians through hours of makeup, prosthetic eyelids, wigs, and carefully choreographed movement. To her credit, Rainer approached the role with the utmost seriousness. She sought out research, observed Chinese women, and delivered a performance so restrained and nuanced that it stood in sharp contrast to the melodramatic norms of the time. Critics lauded her emotional depth, and her famous silent scene, clutching her newborn son as tears fell, became one of the most moving moments in Hollywood history. Rainer would go on to win her second consecutive Academy Award for the role, cementing her place in film legend, but the legacy of her casting has grown increasingly complex. What was once celebrated as a triumph of acting now stands as an emblem of Hollywood's erasure of Asian talent. The painful irony is that Anna May Wong, who lobbied for the part and had the authentic background the role demanded, was passed over for reasons that reflected deep-seated prejudice. The rest of the cast followed suit, almost every major Chinese character played by a white actor in makeup, their authenticity sacrificed to the studio's sense of commercial security. Today, Rainer's Olan is both admired for its artistry and critiqued for its implications. Her performance is haunting and memorable, but her presence in the role remains a symbol of how, in classic Hollywood, the right story could be told by the wrong voices. It's a strange, haunting legacy, one that continues to spark debate about art, representation, and the meaning of authenticity on screen. Myrna Loy as Fa Lo Si, The Mask of Fu Manchu, 1932. Before she became the queen of screwball comedy in the Thin Man series, Myrna Loy was Hollywood's go-to actress for exotic and mysterious roles, an odd legacy, considering her Montana origins and all-American features. Nowhere is this tendency more vividly and strangely on display than in The Mask of Fu Manchu, 1932, where she was cast as Fa Lo Si, the sadistic daughter of Boris Karloff's titular villain. The Mask of Fu Manchu is a film infamous for its wild blend of pulp adventure, Orientalist fantasy, and lurid horror. Loy's Fa Lo Si is introduced as both a femme fatale and a figure of pure menace, reveling in torture and seduction, and draped in slinky gowns meant to evoke both the alluring and the sinister. To transform Loy into an Asian villainess, the studio relied on the era's usual playbook: dark wigs, heavy eyeliner, and exaggerated eyebrows, coupled with exoticized, heavily stylized mannerisms. Loy's performance is both captivating and deeply uncomfortable, a strange collision between her natural elegance and the over-the-top requirements of the script. She moves with hypnotic grace, her dialogue dripping with melodramatic menace. Yet at no point does she actually resemble or authentically portray a Chinese woman. Instead, her characterization, like much of the film, leans heavily into stereotype and fantasy, playing to Western audiences' fascination with the mysterious East rather than any reality. Off-screen, Loy was keenly aware of the limitations and absurdities of these roles. She later spoke out about her discomfort with Hollywood's casting practices and her frustration at being typecast in ethnic parts early in her career. As her stardom grew, she deliberately sought to shed the exotic image and embraced characters that reflected her true identity. The Mask of Fu Manchu has become a cult classic. Its excesses are now viewed as both camp and cautionary tale. Loy's Fa Lo Si is emblematic of an industry that was willing to twist even its brightest stars into caricatures, sacrificing accuracy and respect in the name of sensation. Her transformation in the film is a strange relic from a time when the greatest casting gamble wasn't about stretching an actor's range, but about how far Hollywood could push the boundaries of believability and appropriateness before the illusion fell apart. Hollywood's strangest casting choices are more than just trivia. They're snapshots of an industry always pushing boundaries, sometimes blindly. These decisions sparked debates that still echo today, forcing us to rethink what authenticity means on screen. Which classic casting left you scratching your head? Did we miss one that still baffles you? Share your thoughts in the comments and join the conversation, because in the end, even the most unexpected choices shape how we remember and question the golden age of film.